I'm not interested in being a representative of a large party or a national movement. I want to represent the people who live in my community because that's where I'm rooted. And so far that resonates with them.
Okay, Ann Diamond, independent candidate for Washington State 12th Legislative District, position 1. I wanted to include that part, very interesting. You're from Winthrop, Washington. I'm from Wenatchee. We're neighbors.
We are sisters.
I am so happy to hear about how your campaign is going. Tell me about this recent happy news you want to share about this wonderful victory we've heard about.
It's a 4-county region, and in my county I won. Though there's still 3,000 votes out, so you can't say it's a certified win. But if the numbers hold, I won in my county, and that is news. Other places I did.
This could be history for Washington State.
Yes, it is history. And for my overall district of 4 counties, I made it through a top 2 primary. We have an open primary. And
Yes, we
so
do.
now I get to move forward and to the general election.
Lots of excitement around this. It was very big news. Pushback from the other 2 parties?
Pushback. Well, I think the first step is to prove that you're a credible candidate. And winning when at one point we've had 7 candidates. Once a 16-year incumbent moved out, lots of people moved in. And so to make it through the race and to be in the top 2 means that I'm credible. Now the question is there aren't any independents in our state legislature.
No, there aren't.
So there's not a special seat for us, and people don't know quite how that will work. And one of the advantages of being at this conference is there are independents who are seated and who have legislatures who've had to make room for them, and they have made a difference. And I can take their experience back to my state and say, seems to be working well in South Dakota and in Maine and in Colorado. In other states have done this before.
A lot of people are very impressed with the way Washington State, the election reform has evolved.
Right.
When I go home, I talk to people who have historically been strong Republicans and even Democrats, and they're like, actually, I'm an independent. But when there's no representation, they just feel kind of stuck in the mud. Enthusiastic responses?
Absolutely. I have been knocking on doors of strong Republicans and strong Democrats because there isn't any information on independents.
No.
And I would say a third of the doors I knock on, somebody puts up a hand and says they want a high five because I'm independent too. And even individuals who aren't quite so enthusiastic, when you talk to them about an issue, they will say, well, I'm an independent thinker, or I think for myself. I will make this decision regardless of what the party has to say.
Do you think also that in Washington State, you know, that the state is like split by the Cascade Mountains? On the left side, you get more and more liberal, more progressive. The right side is, I would say, like Republican, slightly libertarian in some ways. But you get this more factions increasing over the years. Have you noticed that? Has this helped people go, I want to keep an open mind about the other side?
I would say that it's not so much Republican and Democrat. It's not binary. There is a rural-urban divide. People in rural areas tend to think a little differently about their small communities.
Yeah, you're right.
And so I would say it's not a party division. I would say it's a way of people living together in their community. And the east side of the Cascades tends to be small farming towns, and each one has a small town feel. But when you travel from small town to small town to small town, and you're from Wenatchee, which even though it's the big city, still prides itself on being a small town.
We are rather large to be,
but
the big city.
They're very community involved. There are probably more nonprofits in Wenatchee than any other city its size. And what that means is people care about their churches, they care about their schools, they care about their parks, and they're willing to do it for their community. But when you start having problems with immigration, with housing, with health care, with education, all of these small communities are looking up and realizing there's no regional planning. folks have not been working together to try to solve what's a regional problem. And that's part of the independent movement, is we like our local pride.
It's part of the culture on that side of the state too, is local pride.
Absolutely.
And friendliness, I must say, but really tending to your community, whatever flavor it happens to be.
I would agree.
I wanted to address, you definitely know what you're talking about, community physician. You've been there for years, dealing with the pluses and minuses of being in a small area, but as you say, regional planning can be a problem. You started your own clinic, you travel around, and you have got in-depth community experience. That gives you a ton of credibility with these voters.
Well, there's credibility, but then people have to know who you are. So within my own community, certainly people have been very supportive. I have to get out. It's an enormous district. You know the Wenatchee area, but this is 4 counties, and there are 8 people per square mile in my county. So knocking on doors in the usual sense of politicking doesn't work, because I can spend 40 minutes between houses. Just
Fill
trying
up
to
that gas
find,
tank,
right.
bring some extra. I mean, that's
Keep
some
moving.
serious canvassing.
So instead of just going door to door, we're having to use social media and phone calls and other ways of getting the word out. And also, then you have meetings at the Grange, or you have meetings at the library, or a lot of coffee shops have been started, and having a coffee clatch in the morning and trying to meet with people. So just getting out as much as possible in the community, to hear what people have to say, to learn from their experience, and to figure out what would be best for Legislative District 12.
A lot of people might not know what the Grange is. It's a very interesting, very politically involved group. They have years ago were behind election ballot access reform. Well, not a lot of people know that in Washington State. It's another very colorful, interesting facet. When you talk about no regional planning and the frustration people have in your district, all around the area, what are you talking about? You know, you talk about immigration and healthcare. Are they hitting their breaking point with anything in particular? Is there something that unites them, like
regional
one
planning,
big
I would say
thing?
housing.
Housing, okay.
Housing is probably the biggest issue for all of these small communities, because what's happening is we're an agricultural community for the most part, and we do not have enough workers to pick the crops. People lose entire crops because when cherries come on, if you don't have hands ready and available immediately, the fruit spoils before you can pick it. And many times workers need housing, and they can take much of the housing that other individuals who would like to live in that community would stay in. And there is now conflict between large orchards, housing, and individuals coming back into the community who would like to live there. So young professionals, teachers, nurses cannot find housing. And that means that the hospitals can't recruit. And I talked to the Bureau of Reclamation up in Grand Coulee, which is close to the Canadian border. They have 50 openings right now for jobs that they cannot fill because they have no housing for the individuals.
That is a very surprising thing for people to hear.
Housing is close to number one.
It's not jobs, it's housing.
No, the jobs
to
are
fill
there.
those jobs.
And when you're looking at some of the communities, there's a small community that is mostly recreational, and so the jobs tend to be hospitality or service, and there are no houses there. So people who are making minimum wage are traveling 50 miles into a community to work for minimum wage jobs, and then they take those minimum wages out of the community to where they're living and spend them. And what that's doing is shelling out many of these communities. People have to come in, won't spend there, it becomes a tourist economy only, and there's no new individuals moving in to help support the larger businesses or the hospitals or the schools.
What about, so as we move forward, just in closing, what are you, game plan, war plan, how are you penciling in on the old map, what you're doing?
So the last couple of days I took off because the primary just finished, and that's why it hasn't been certified yet. Once I got back from this conference, I'm going to start doorbelling again on Monday. and I will continue to work through the district. And I believe that the next step is going to be taking it up a notch. Before it was just learning about what some of the issues are. Now it's going to be talking about how we move forward with them. How do you access more funding for housing and building in our region? How do we recover from the 2008 recession? And how do we have transportation and roads between these rural communities that allows for the economic development and survivability of small towns in eastern Washington?
And all of the issues you're talking about are not often covered in the media enough.
I would say they are in our local media, but perhaps not in the national media. And that's part of being a representative of a small community. I'm not interested in being a representative of a large party or a national movement. I want to represent the people who live in my community because that's where I'm rooted. And so far that resonates with them.
Wonderful to hear. Congratulations on
you.
your recent and soon to be certified results. Great.
Great.
And I'm an independent candidate for Washington State 12th Legislative District.
Thank you, Lindsay.